This is Michael Schasser.
Hello.
He was born June 19, 1963. He was in the U.S. Air Force during the Gulf War. His highest rank achieved was a sergeant. This is Lake Odessa, Michigan, in May 24, 2011. And he is a friend of the family, and also assisting me here is Caitlin Schasser.
Hey, Mom.
This interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Now, where and when were you born?
I was born in Livonia, Michigan, 1963. June 19th. Yeah.
So, what were you doing before you entered the service?
I was working for my father. He owned a company, security company, and I used to make security cards and things like that.
Sweet. Did you have any special skills involved in that job?
Well, not really. It's not really too technical to run a laminator and things like that, but I did participate in the other side of the business, the security side of the house, and you know, I did learn a little bit about electronics and things like that. The thing was, my brother was older than I, and that he had that part of the business, although I really liked that part of the business, but I got stuck with the laminating the cards.
So, did you have other family members that joined the service?
My uncle, he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and yeah, so and my father was back in 1956, I think, during the, no, it would have been, it was at the end of the 50s that my father was in the Navy. He served in the Navy. Yeah.
So, what were your feelings on them being in the military?
Well, I always, looking back, that was always, you know, proud, you know, always thought about my father, you know, serving. I used to always look at his uniform and felt proud, you know. And then I remember the days back in the late 60s and the 70s. I was, you know, born in 63. I was only like 8 or 9 years old or whatever, but I remember being very worried about my uncle, you know, constantly getting letters and things like that. Being a Huey pilot, it was a pretty hazardous job. But yeah, I felt very proud that he served, and yeah.
So, how did you enter the service?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on. I tried to join the service earlier on, like when I was 19, or I ended up going into service when I was 23 years old. Really, the job, just, you know, laminating cards and things like that. I met my wife, you know, who at the time, you know, we were seeing each other and stuff like that, and you know, there's a lot of things going on. It's not one thing or another. It's a conglomeration of everything. It's my faith. It's wanting to be married, you know, to my wife and be able to support her. Just a lot of things going on, but really at the core, I mean, coupled with my faith and just wanting something more than myself, you know. And I saw in the military, actually, my wife's brother was in the Air Force, and I forgot to mention that. Actually, he was probably most instrumental in me joining the Air Force, because we went and visited him, and when I visited him, he was a captain, and he took me on base and kind of showed me what the life was like and things like that. And that really, you know, seeing those guys in that uniform and, you know, shiny boots, proud, really hit at a core. And I knew that at the course we were going, of course we weren't married yet, but I knew I wanted to be married to my wife, you know. And so all that kind of coupled together, we had a plan. I would join the service. I would join the service. How did it go? I joined the service. We picked a date to get married, and I joined the service. But I went in after like 3 months after I was married. So it was kind of a chance, not knowing what we were going to get into, leaving the security of home, the business and everything. Yet I knew that I had to take that step. I knew I had to just suck it up and go do it. And I remember, it was very sad to leave, my wife and everything. But I also remember at the time, as I was leaving to go to the airport with all the guys, just this thrill of a new adventure, a new tomorrow. I was going to wake up tomorrow and it wasn't going to be the same. And I guess that would explain, why and how I joined the service.
Why did you pick the Air Force?
Well, I think, again, my brother had a lot to do with it. My brother-in-law, he wasn't my brother-in-law at the time, but eventually that was my brother-in-law. I really, to be married and to be away on a ship, that wasn't going to work out, I don't think, too well. Although I found out after I joined that my career field that I am, which I was a wideband communication specialist, which, just to give you a little background on what that is, when they go in and they set up strategic airfields and stuff like that, they have to set up communications. And wideband communications oftentimes were like mountaintop, like a relay point. So if we were invading a country and we, say in Afghanistan, and in a forward position, they would have an airfield. Well, they would have to have all that data come from that location, back to headquarters. And oftentimes what would happen is that the relay points would be in mountaintops. And we would be the guys that would go in there and set up all the communications, and they would be a relay point back to HQ. As it turned out, there were a lot of remote assignments in that field. And a remote assignment, in a way, was tougher than being in the Navy, because if I got a remote assignment, I would be gone a year and a half without seeing my wife, other than leave. So, but as luck would have it, I ended up getting a remote slot, but I ended up going to the Azore Islands. And in the Azore Islands, you could bring your wife. They gave us a remote because the base was kind of primitive, and the culture was kind of primitive. And like we couldn't drink the water or anything like that, and there were still donkeys going up and down the road and stuff like that. And we had to live in an off-base housing, and but I tell you what, it was definitely the Portuguese people are beautiful people, and we really, really enjoyed it. That's about it.
So when you were in the Azore Islands, what was it like kind of adapting to that new lifestyle?
Well, at first it was really exciting because it was a totally different culture, and it was humbling because, in America we take a lot for granted. Trust me, we take a lot for granted. The people that we rented a house from, it was her house, and she lived in the back in a makeshift Quonset hut. But yet her house was beautiful, okay, in order to rent, and that's how she made money to live on. And she had her kids and stuff like that there, and just watching them, day to day, and seeing how well we had it. But I'll say this, though. They were happy, material things do not bring you happiness. Those kids were just as happy as any kid in America, and it was just a really good experience. We got to know people, and the beautiful subtropic weather, you know. Winters, it would get down to 50s, 60s, maybe occasionally in the 40s. I think one time over the 3 years, it snowed briefly. It was like a fluke thing, you know. And then the summers were typically 80 degrees, maybe 90, but nothing really hot. But the winters, though, because we were in the middle, I should say a little bit about the Azores, right in the middle Atlantic Ocean. It's 500 miles off the coast of Portugal, and it's about 700 miles off the coast of New York, or the United States. And there's nothing to stop the wind. And in the wintertime, it was commonplace to have 100-mile-an-hour winds. But one thing you got to understand is that the houses were built for it. They were basically solid cement houses. And then they had these shutters that would pull over the windows that were made out of metal that would actually protect the windows. I remember one time, though, we did have extraordinarily high winds. I don't know how high they were. They could have been up in the 130s, 120, 140 mile-an-hour winds. The island was fine. The base, on the other hand, suffered $2 million worth of damage. But the people, you know, they know how to live in those conditions. In the wintertime, we would have to have kerosene heat because we had no heat in the house. So we'd have a little kerosene heater, but that was pretty much all you needed, you know. It'd get a little chilly if it was really a cold night, but for the most part, you know, you had a lot of blankets and stuff like that. It wasn't too bad. One thing they had was a flash heater for the showers, and you had to kind of watch those because they would literally ignite and go up and, you know, smoke, you know. But it was, the neat thing about it is that it was ever-ending hot water because, you know, the water would go through it and it would instantly heat it, you know. But what I really, really liked was the culture, the people. I mean, seeing them, when we were there, they had Our Lady of Fatima statue was coming to the island. And for those that are not Catholic, Our Lady of Fatima is an apparition back in the early 1900s to 3 children. It's a Catholic Church approved apparition of the Virgin Mary. At the time, we were Lutheran. After the fact, we ended up becoming Catholic. But this isn't to get into a religious thing. Didn't mean to get into there. But what I had to set the backdrop. They would make these. They would have these forms that they would have on the streets, you know, and they would take flower petals, and they would fill these forms on the street, and they would just be this beautiful mosaic of flowers all up and down the street. And everybody put out their best linens, you know. They all aired them out, and then this procession of the statue came through. And just seeing the beautiful faith of these people, how happy they were. They didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, you know. But they valued what was most valuable. They valued each other, family, you know, friendship, and life, you know. And I think that's one of the most important things that I learned being in the service is seeing other cultures, realizing how great we have it in America, and just, you know, just how beautiful it was.
So, since you had this report mission, did you have like any specialized training and stuff to get you ready for it? Or?
Oh yeah. I went through 6 or 7 months of tech school at Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi. And basically, it was cramming 2 years of college into 6 months. Technical courses. Basically, I had an associate's degree, more or less, without all the English and the humanities, but all the core electronic courses, radio courses, communication courses to fulfill an associate's degree. I did really well. I got top student, top grad. It definitely helped to prepare me. But the thing is, with the military though, is, you know, wideband communication specialist is what you train for. My first assignment actually was in ground radio, and I actually maintained the air traffic control radio. So here I am being trained for the mountaintop, very high frequency stuff, and then I'm dealing with VHF and UHF transmitters. But the training that they give you, the background that they give you, is more than sufficient. It's ongoing training in the military because there's so many, they stick you in these core curriculums, and then basically, they take you to a new assignment, and then that assignment might be something different, but you have the training in the background, and then you have to do additional training. In addition to that, I think one day I actually did wideband communication specialist. I did it for one day, and they moved me. So then I went to the tower, and then when I finished at the tower, I think it was only like 6 months or something like that. I was working at the tower and radios and things like that. Then they moved me to an HF site, which is a very low frequency site. And they're huge. HF radios are very high powered radios and very low frequency as compared to wideband and air traffic control radios. Totally different philosophy and technology, but again, the same, And so they moved me out to Cinco, which was a transmitter site. And imagine I would say even bigger than that, probably about 5 to 8 football fields. That's a rough guess, of nothing but antennas. This huge, that's all it is a transmitter site. It just transmits. They had the other site, which I can't remember the name yet, Cinco, and then they had the receiver site. So it was miles away, and it was equally as big. But all it was a receiver site. So basically, when somebody on the base talked through a microphone and they said, hello, it was actually going out of that huge transmitter site. And then when they receive, they're actually receiving in from the receiver site. And the wideband communications, I know it's getting a little technical, but the wideband communications transmitted over the mountaintop to the base, this transmitter site and this receiver site. So the guy is sitting here just on a microphone thinking he's talking out of a little radio. No, he is literally talking out of this huge, and HF goes all around the world. HF is the backup to satellite. If something were ever to happen to satellite, like if they knock out our satellites and things like that, the HF site would be the backup. You literally could talk around the world. Because what it does, it just bounces off the atmosphere and the Earth, the signal. It never escapes into space, and it just goes around the Earth. And so you have a way of communicating in a backup situation. What was unique about the Azore Islands was that the Navy flew the planes, the Army did the boats, and the Air Force did all the ground stuff. It was totally backwards. I take that back. There was an Air Force mission that flew, but the primary mission was the P-3 airplanes that would go out and fly, and they would actually be what they call sub-hunters. And their job was, in the event of war, they would hunt out all the Soviet subs, and they would, take them out. And their whole mission was the North Atlantic. And then basically, then we had the refueling. The Azores was a big refueling point. And we had these, I forget what they were called. I forget the C number of the plane or whatever, but they were the big refueling planes that you always see in commercials and things like that, with the telescoping thing that comes out of the back of the plane, and planes will pull up and get refueled. That was also a very big primary mission. When the Gulf War, it was kind of, when things were building up for the Gulf War, we had a ton of these planes come in, And, we had missions because as they were building up and getting things ready, they constantly, and they were noisy. Oh my gosh, these planes were noisy. And they would go off, and hear them go off all the time, and they're up there refueling planes and stuff going over. But I remember specifically one day when everything on the base unloaded. The entire base I forget, it was like 18 refuelers were up there. I said, you know what? We kind of did the math. We said, 5-6 hours from now, I guarantee you we're invading, Kuwait. And sure enough, 5-6 hours later, they were bombing. All those B-1, B-2 bombers flying over were being refueled, and they did. They let loose, and we knew it because it was just like one after another, after another, after another. I'm thinking, each one of those could refuel, I don't know how many planes, and I'm thinking, you do the math, there's just got to be this huge flotilla going over our head, And sure enough, I remember 5-6 hours later, they were bombing Kuwait. But then, the Azores, we were there for 3 years, and it was a very beautiful island, very beautiful culture, but a 10 by 20 mile island for 3 years with 50,000 people on it. It was time for us to head back to the United States. I mean, now I'd love to go back. I would love to go back. It would be cool to go visit and all that, but it was time for us to go. So my last assignment was to Fairchild Air Force Base in Washington. And I went from this military airlift command, which was kind of an easy, life, to Strategic Air Command. And I went from actually the assignment after Cinco was at base radio. I took care of all the pager systems and all that too before I left. But so now here, one day I was doing wideband, and I did air traffic control, I did HF, and I did all base radio stuff. Now they have me doing security systems. I leave home, right, because my brother's doing the security side. So now I'm in charge of repairing, maintaining all the security systems that protect the nuclear weapons. Can you imagine how uptight that was? I tell you what, that was a very high, stressful job. I mean, every day we would go into the facility, there were codes you had to remember, you couldn't mess up. I was there when they did a congressional walkthrough with senators and things like that. And, but it didn't matter. I look back at the military, it didn't matter how tough the assignment was or whatever. Every day I put on that uniform was a great thing. And in a lot of ways I miss it. I really do. Part of me wishes that I would have stayed in, not gotten out, but obviously if I would have done that, things would have changed. I wouldn't have my beautiful family, so God has a plan, so He's in charge. But I do really remember just how honored every day I went in to serve. But I do remember one time when we were going into the nuclear weapons storage area, we get through the checkpoint, we get through all that, and we're heading up to, our first security bunker where they had the nuclear weapons. And the one guy was there, and they would have to call and radio, and there was a number. Every day was different. It would give you a number. So the guy would give you a number, and then you have to subtract or add or whatever it was that day. Well, needless to say, he subtracted wrong. And within seconds, I was on the ground, my face was buried in the cement, I had an M60 pointed into the back of my neck. We were all on the ground. And we're all looking at this guy going, thanks, pal, thanks a lot. Needless to say, I didn't get home till late that night. My wife was probably wondering what was going on, because we all had to get debriefed and all that kind of stuff. And those guys knew what happened, and they're just loving it. They lived for the moment, right? That somebody would screw up. But I remember also being out there. I'm kind of rambling on, but I remember being out. We'd be doing our fence checks and things like that, the sensors and the fences and all that. And all of a sudden, we'd turn around and there would be guys with weapons pointed at us, about to give us a heart attack. And what they were doing was games to see if they could sneak up on you without having us hear them. And sure enough, you turn around and look, and there'd be these guys, and there'd be one here, and they'd all be coming on you, like, oh my gosh, But no, it was great. I got out. I served 4 years. I actually got out on humanitarian separation, but the humanitarian, actually I took longer than 4 years when I came back to the States. My father was dying, there was things going on with that. So I got out under a humanitarian separation, but I'd served over my 4 years. It's just I had to take an extension to come back to the States. But it was, that leap of faith, just a lot of times in life you got to take a chance. Otherwise, you know what? Things will never change if you don't, So that's about it.
Did you make any friends when you were in the service?
Oh, tons of friends. Bob and Sue, who we still somewhat keep in touch with, Doug Fugit. Those are probably the two that we keep in touch with on and off, But yeah, lots of friends, a lot of good people that you run into. So, yeah.
Were they all doing the same work as you, or?
Yeah, they were all in the same rate. They all had the same type of job. Because you tend to, stick with your own kind of thing. So yeah, they were all in the same rate that I was in. Bob was my NCO in charge at the tower, and he was a Louisiana boy, and he had the accent, and he was a character. He was character, and his family, and we had barbecue all the time, and yeah, just great. It was a good life. I would do it in a New York second. Yeah, again, yeah.
So has your time in the military made you feel differently about what you used to feel about war, like the war in Iraq or anything?
Well, I think, yeah, I know a little bit, although I don't know battle conditions, but I know about the training, preparing, and those kind of things, at least in the Air Force, in the career field that I was in. I think every guy that joins the military, ultimately you're looking for something beyond yourself. And the thing is, and it's something higher. You're serving something higher, a higher purpose, and that means a lot. And I think a lot of times in life we end up spinning our wheels. We end up, getting stuck in the mundane and that's when we get in trouble. That's when things go wrong. But if we have a purpose, it taught me that if you have a purpose in life, which ultimately my faith life, right, it all taken to a higher level in my faith life, but it's the same in essence. Serving your country, serving a higher purpose, protecting the citizens of our country. Every one of those guys, they don't make too bad money, they do all right and all that, but that's not the reason why they're doing it. The reason why they're doing it is for that higher purpose of service. And every one of those guys is to be commended for their service. And I really, really appreciate anyone. Well, my son, Dan, he's following a little bit my footsteps, although he's outdoing me. He's going to be an officer in the United States Air Force. He's going through the ROTC program in about a year and a half. When he graduates, he'll be a commissioned officer. I guess that's about it.
Thank you very much for your time.
Hey,
I
no
really
problem.
appreciate it.
Not a problem.
Thank you.
No problem.
Sweet. That was the best interview ever.